Dear friends, I believe we should be starting. Who needs the simultaneous translation? Because we have two working languages, English and Ukrainian. There are special pieces of equipment. Please use them. I am Liubov Tsybulska. I represent the group I'm deputy head of hybrid warfare analytical group. Allow me to introduce our panelist, Ruslan Kavatsiuk, my colleague from the group, the same group, Yevhen Fedchenko, co-founder of StopFake project, Natalia Ligachova, media detector, and Raul Rebane, communications and media consultant from Estonia. From the beginning of military intervention to Ukraine in 2014, our country has been fighting fakes, disinformation, enemies' narratives, as well as with military, diplomatic, and economic actions, everything that is covered by the term hybrid war. But this hybrid attack started long time ago, back in 2006. That's when the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, stated about the ideological platform Ruski Mir, Russian world. And since then, Russia believes that that's their task to defend their compatriots all over the world, not just in Russia. In 2010, Russia passed the new military doctrine. In 2016, they changed one more. They passed one more strategic document, the concept of the foreign policy. And this concept identifies such tasks as strengthening the positions of Russia as one of the most powerful centers in the world, and strengthening Russian mass media in the world. Unlike in the West, Russians in all their documents write that information warfare is going on. They are permanently conducting the information warfare. The Western countries believe that that's the component, the one that adds up to military actions. Today we'll be talking about narratives as to Ukraine. In Russian, on Russian TV, I will show you the video from our center, and then Ruslan Kavatsiuk will talk about the research itself, image of Ukraine.
Бизнес-проект.
Напомню, Украина — слово польское. Русское слово, то есть оно означает окраин. Русское слово — это Малороссия. Все, нет там никакого государства, потому что государство должны быть не только атрибуты в виде какого-то президента и парламента, должен быть суверенитет.
В среднем говорят, что если человека разобрать на органы, это около $1,5 миллиона. Украина должна 70 миллиардов. Я посчитал, 70 миллиардов разделил на 1,5 миллиона. 46 666, 660, 60, 60.
Я не удивлен, что у нас 3 шестерки.
Украинцев, это все
дьявольская идея.
Вот это...
Украина — это
не цивилизованное государство. Нынешний режим нацистский. Он выдал такую повестку дня.
На Украине решили выпустить мемуары одного из идеологов нацизма Йозефа Геббельса. По данным СМИ, харьковское издательство готовится отправить в печать дневники нацистского преступника, который был министром пропаганды в гитлеровской Германии. Как сухо сказано в аннотации, без этих записей невозможно полное понимание национал-социализма.
Новый скандал на Украине. Депутат Рады распевает песни, славящие Гитлера.
Мусорную иллюстрацию могут заменить уличные виселицы. С таким заявлением выступил заместитель Коломойского. И на фоне всего происходящего в это нетрудно поверить. В школах Украины появился новый учебник «Бандеровская азбука», в которой главный герой – юный воин УПА.
Заселяют Одессу, Херсон, Николаев, заселяют другие регионы. Вывозят крестьян из Галичины и завозят по региону, выдавая им должности в управлении, учителей или еще что-то в ЖЭКах, удаляют людей, то есть полная ассимиляция, украинизация и так идет.
Украинские власти со следующего учебного года отменяют в украинских школах два курса. Это курс мировой литературы, его не будет, и курс мировой истории.
Уже пытаются отменить Новый год, чтобы не было Деда Мороза. То есть у нас Санта-Клаус и Святой Николай никогда, потому что русский Дед Мороз.
Есть факты о каннибализме в Доме профсоюзов. То есть там есть слова, когда человек говорит, здесь едят человечину. То есть и человек ходит с салфетками.
Я вот своими глазами видела, когда подругу мою насиловали на глазах у ее мужа, а потом его же расстреляли на наших глазах. Мы чудом оттуда сбежали.
Мы понимаем, что оружие поставляется на внутриукраинскую гражданскую войну, где ни одна сторона заведомо не может одержать над другой военную победу. Со стороны американцев это просто стремление Украину уничтожить.
По сути, там идет гражданская война.
Гражданская война на Украине окончательно вышла за пределы Юго-Востока. После бойни в Мукачево взрывы гремят уже во Львове. Есть пострадавшие.
И только мольбы, так сказать, западных стран перед лицом Владимира Владимировича Путина позволят остановить наступление армии Новороссии, армии Донбасса и освобождение дальнейших территорий.
Страна буквально умирает. Вот на этой неделе из Киева пришло сообщение, что население Украины за минувший год без учета Крыма и Донбасса сократилось аж на 200 тысяч человек.
На Украине готовят 7-ю внеплановую мобилизацию, причем призывать теперь в армию планируется не с 18, а с 16 лет. Об этом свидетельствуют документы, перехваченные разведкой Донецкой республики.
Российский народ поддерживает российскую власть, потому что российский народ знает, что рядом с ней есть такие подонки, предатели, фашисты и мерзавцы, которые зажгли Украину. И российский народ никогда не позволит устроить войну на себя. Мы будем терпеть, но когда вот эта мразь к нам придет, мы ее уничтожим, как уничтожили в 41-43 году.
Мы сейчас один раз бровь поднимем, и Украина поймет все.
Отже, Руслане, тепер слово за вами. Розкажіть.
So, Ruslan, now the floor is yours. Tell us about information war. Good afternoon. In principle, many of these things you've probably seen, or these are things which are not new for you, but at the same time they are of emotional nature, but also that is something that really makes us all think. We need to understand what the state Russian machine is trying to explain to their audience. Their key audience is internal audience, and all the information events are directed towards it, and when the messages are sent to it, these are more open wordings. They are not like what is said during the foreign trips, or not like what experts talk about at different conferences in Russia. and the wording is not what we can see in Ukrainian mass media. Trying to understand this topic, we were trying to select the methodology which will allow us to avoid the emotional assessment. We were trying to understand what we hear, to what extent it's disseminated, is that the trend or is it not the trend? And I will tell more about methodology later on, but I will start from saying, I hope that you all can see that. So what is the context? The context where we were doing the research is that Russian fake news or troll fabrics or factories are not anything new. There are many organizations that work with that. And our task was to try and look at what is somewhat deeper than just tools which we see on the surface. What deeper stories the Russian information agenda is trying to give. What are these stories? Which one of these stories is important for them? And we were trying to measure that. The example of narrative. For example, there's a narrative that the West is trying to seize Russia, but they fail to do that. That is what Russian authorities are telling their population about the West. And for that, they're using some real news. They don't even use fake news. We took as an example the launch of Tesla by Musk to the space. Many different newsmakers, Russian newsmakers and mass media provided comments on that. But all these comments, they fall under this narrative, which is that the West is trying to seize Russia, but they fail to do that. Methodology that we used in our research was our partners were one of the leading marketing agencies which are used by business community. And we were doing it to use maximum objective approaches to measure the basis. The database was Russian top TV channels, which in 3.5 years we took the keywords from the 3.5 years. Then we were automatically finding all the mentions of these keywords, and then the people were reading all these pieces of news and were distributing them into categories. And the total context, if you don't know, in Russia the TV is the most influential mass media. About 60% of Russians, they trust TV. In Ukraine, the level of the number of those who are watching is high, but fewer people trust TV channel. The share of 3 TV channels sums up to 47%. From 42%. This is Russia 1, First Channel, and NTV. In Russia, out of these 3 TV channels, Russians mostly watch TV for more than 4 hours a day, which is very close to other countries. It's not something radically big. We have the same number of people watching TV in Ukraine and some European countries, but the most popular TV channels are those 3. all these three top channels, directly or indirectly, via are subordinate to Crimea, to the Kremlin. There is one like Russia One, which is under Putin, under the Kremlin, and there is NTV and another one which are also basically subordinate to the Kremlin. It is difficult for some outside information to get to Russia. In 2016, only 7% of Russians traveled abroad. We know that very few people in Russia know foreign languages. We were trying to understand for ourselves what is the coverage by TV in Ukraine, and we compared. The first column is 2013, before the war with Russian Federation started, and the second one is the current situation. The blue strip, which is about 4%, that is Russian TV, which officially was present in our media space. Now we don't see them because they are prohibited, and we see just how the gray zone grows up from 14% to 16%, and these are the TV channels which are not examined. We do not really know whether Russian TV has some influence, and that is why we asked the Detector media, where they did a survey where 5% of respondents replied that they watch Russian TV channels. 11% of them are watching Russian TV in the East. But we need to take into account also that we could think that that's not very popular to say that you watch Russian TV. So there might be the element of self-censorship present here. If you compare that with other countries of Eastern Europe, Moldova, Belarus, and Transcaucasian countries, Ukraine has the biggest share of population which speaks Russian, and the percentage of penetration of Russian TV is the biggest. The next one is Moldova, and in other countries has most. Belarus is the biggest consumer of Russian content, direct consumer. Also, you probably do not know which TV channels are the most popular in Ukraine. We took this information from outside external sources, and we see that in the second half of 2017, the ratio of the positive and negative news about Ukraine on Russian TV was 10-1. 10 pieces of news are negative and 1 only is positive. Key narratives, which cover 90% of everything that's mentioned about Ukraine, there are just 6 of them. Out of all the negative pieces of news on Russian TV about other countries of the world, the third part of that are dedicated to Ukraine. And from that third part, we understand that 6 key narratives cover all the communication about Ukraine.
Let's look at them, but before doing this in detail, I should mention that all those 6 narratives during that 3.5 years, they are continuously present in our analysis, although they shares the split of percentage between them, it slightly changes. Two of that narratives take almost a half of all the news about Ukraine. So the first of that half of the narrative that in Ukraine the civil war is being waged, and that's why much is communicated about the armed forces of Ukraine. Much effort is devoted to delegitimization. That's why mass media speak much about crimes committed by the armed forces, by officers and soldiers, that they do something unlawful, illegal, and this and an example from the end of 2017, when we believe that there was not a hot stage of war in our opinion. Nevertheless, Russian media at that time mentioned that the situation at the front line was worsening sharply, and Ukrainian army had violated Minsk agreements and opened something like offensive. The second big narrative is the message that Ukraine is a failed state. Thus, they try to delegitimize Ukrainian institutions on the one hand, and to prove that Ukraine is not a state. Here you see an example of a conclusion that Ukraine is a failed state because of some failures in the energy sector, and the end suggestion is that authorities are helpless. Narrative number 3, that the Russian Federation provides assistance or help to Donbass. For us, it was rather unexpected that this narrative appeared to be very important for the Russians, and we tried to understand why. And it seems to us that the Russian Federation thus tries to provide grounds for their population, and to explain why many countries were included to the Russian world, why Donbass is not included to the Russian world. And year after year, Russia, which promised to provide a lot, actually is doing nothing. So through this communication about help to Donbass, they try to convince TV watchers that why and how they help. This is an example how children from Donbass are evacuated to Russian hospitals. Narrative number 4. Russophobia. There are stories how Russian citizens or Russian supporters are massively persecuted, and this is continuously shown in different ways at Russian TV channels. Here you see a direct quotation. This is a mocking formulation how Ukraine had imposed a ban on the St. George's St. George's Award suspension ribbon. And they pretended and allegedly provided witnesses that women were intimidated for wearing St. George's suspension ribbons, or elderly people were intimidated, which is of course not true. Narrative number 5, fascists and radical elements tried to destroy Ukraine, and that's why they explained that there is a need to go to Ukraine and defend those who do not support those Nazis and fascists. This is an example of quotation about this narrative number 5. This is Zyuganov saying that this is contemporary Ukraine, which is collapsing under the pressure of Bandera supporters, CIA agents, Nazis, and criminals. So he tries to explain that something very bad is going on in Ukraine, and it is collapsing almost at this very moment. Narrative number 6, Ukrainian is a puppet of the Western countries, and all Ukrainian achievements could be annihilated from this point of view. For example, when Ukraine was awarded visa-free regime, this was explained that this was like a bargain for Ukraine's freedom. And this again convinces people that Russia should go to Ukraine and bring it to order. And here you see an example of this expert, allegedly from the United States, who says that in Poland there are secret US military bases where people are trained and later sent to Ukraine. So our conclusions in result of all those research, we have found out that 1/3 of the information in Russian news releases is devoted to Ukraine. It may look not much, but since it is very straightforward, very target-oriented, it is very efficient. They are very well disciplined and focused. This disinformation is targeting Ukrainian public institutions and branches of power. They try to delegitimize Ukrainian army and government authorities in the eyes of Russian citizens. And all this communication is aimed at mocking and laughing at Ukrainian state and Ukrainian people. They suggest that these are not full-fledged people, not very competent people, that they are fools, etc. Another conclusion is that they try to impose that currently in Ukraine there is a dictatorship of radical minority which creates chaos and persecutes Russian-speaking people, and these fascists, they impose their own policy upon entire Ukraine. This logically brings people to the idea that Ukraine should be liberated from these people, and this again demonstrates to Russian population that the choice of Western direction for development, which was selected by Ukrainians, which was chosen by Ukrainians, this is improper way of development. Further on, when we look at the number of publications, we can see that international news sometimes can take 90% of time from news release. They can speak about Syria, about the United States, France, China, Ukraine, etc. Not mentioning the Russian problems. They suggest they try to focus attention of population on the things on the news which are external, not on the internal things. By the way, officially independent TV channels, which should be competitors, which should strive to produce different materials to suggest different topics. They subjects, they all coincide in the coverage, in the picture, in video picture. They all coincide in messages, and they repeat the same news releases and formulate this in the same words, and this brings to idea that they are totally identical instead of competitiveness. Why this is a threat for us? Looking at external sources of information, we can understand that more than 60% of Ukrainians do not have sufficient information about the purposes of Ukraine, the purposes of our state. This 60% opens the door to disinformation coming from Moscow. More than half of Ukrainians do not share that the idea that Russian TV channels should be banned. Some people believe that a ban over Russian television was a mistake. What could be recommended? We try to build up recommendations which could be efficient in the existing Ukrainian legal base, and in the framework of international legislation database. We should formulate a definition of propaganda and disinformation about application of hostile lexicon, and we came to conclusion that Russian state TV channels and their representatives could be seen and recognized as mass media. They should be perceived as tools of propaganda aimed at outbreak of the national hostilities and aggression. That's why they should not be granted the same rights as the representatives of free media. And vice versa, we should impose some restrictions upon them up to the end of the war with Russia. Also, initiators and participants of coordinated informational war against Ukraine in Russia should be systemically identified and included into special sanctional short list, and later on Ukraine will be able, having the short list, to frozen their assets in Ukraine, to apply for bringing them to responsibility, etc. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Ruslan. Now I would like to give the floor for interventions to all our participants, and later on we will ask questions. Ilya, you also analyze the Russian fakes. Can you tell that this trend remains strong, or it is it's becoming weaker? I'm representing StopFake. We have been carrying out this observation and analysis of Russian fakes for almost 4 years. During that period of time, we monitor Russian media, and we monitored not TV channels but news channels, internet websites, printed media, where we discovered fake news. We disclosed that fake nature and revived the truthful information. During this period of time, we have collected a lot of information which is available for more attentive research. Now we have more than 1,000 of information pieces which we disclosed, and there were some other which were unable to correct, because we had not sufficient obvious facts. So in result of all that material, having monitored them, we also came to conclusion about main narratives, and identified the so-called Russian news agencies, so-called because they produce something which could not be seen as news. That's why they should not be given the same rights as independent journalists. And we had produced 2 major reviews about main narratives and about the circle of news agencies which dealt with that narratives. I won't describe our methodology. I will present immediately the output. Who was the leader of untrue information in Ukraine? These were Russian media. But there were also Russian media, Ukrainian media, which also disseminated fake news, but because of other reason than Russian media. While Russian media produced fake narratives and disseminated them, then Ukraine's media reproduced that news trying to attract more people or trying to be in core or cover the same news as others. Then we monitored DPR and LPR, so-called DPR, LPR mass media.
We followed their role in this ecosystem of fake news. It's secondary compared to Russian media, but they also work and certain messages are disseminated via them, and they sort of refer to someone. They are not producing the news themselves, and this ecosystem in the last 4 years has not been significantly changed. Those who participated in producing this fake news 4 years ago, they continue to do that. Answering our question, are there fewer of them? We say no. Talking about numbers, in certain periods of time there are even more of them. If we expect now the finals, football finals in Kiev, we see that there are plenty of fake news related to that, and also you can say that fake news are adapted to main pieces of news that are taking place in Ukrainian political space, so that if in Ukraine we actively discuss the reform of the public health, we immediately see how the number of fake news goes up. Or if we are talking about visa-free regime in Ukraine, we see that there are plenty of fake news related to that. They were saying that Ukraine will never get it. This is just Ukrainians will not be able to work. No one promised that Ukrainians will be able to work. They will say that Ukrainians don't have money and they will not travel abroad. And they explained it to Russian audience that there's no sense to open borders for Ukrainians because all Ukrainians are criminals, and this will lead to just the increased numbers of criminals who will go to Europe. And they were mentioning the TV channel of the Ministry of Defense of Russia and the Federation. They made the 40 minutes documentary about that, and they were explaining to Russian audience that in fact there's no visa-free regime in Ukraine. Again, it's about certain ecosystem where each organization knows what it does, where is its place. Same way the Russian journalists who were insiders in this system, from them we know more about how it works. They emphasized many times that there's a centralized newsroom on producing such fake news, and it's located in RIA Novosti in Moscow, and then they produce the content and disseminate it to different TV channels. And there's also the presidential administration where the editors receive certain messages with which they have to work. Briefly speaking, what Russian media organizations participate in producing fake news? All or practically all, irrespective of whether they are state-owned or privately owned, but in Russian reality that is basically, that has no difference, because all the news cycle is regulated in the centralized way, even by such organizations which we usually believe are liberal, like Novaya newspaper or Dozhd TV channel. They sometimes are getting involved into producing fake news. But the three main leaders are TV channel Zvezda. We got most of the fakes from them. From all the material, 79 of them were. The next one is site Ukraine.ru. which is also part of the holding RIA Novosti, headed by Kiselyov, and they pretend that they are Ukrainian information agency, and their main objective, their main task is to create some news. And the third one is the RIA Novosti information agency. We were talking a lot about it here last week, whether it's correct to persecute so-called journalists who work there. We are convinced that it was correct to do, and all the information we gathered, according to that, we know that it plays one of the main roles in disseminating fake news. And fake news are not just some separate pieces of news. If we are talking about the site Ukraine.ru, it does it on a daily basis. If you enter this website, every day you see some fakes which are produced specially, and they're directed to Ukrainian and Russian audience. And from our point of view, the fact that only to now we stopped the work of RIA Novosti information agency is the correct reaction, but quite delayed. And look at what the ecosystem looks like. You can see it on the right part of the screen. Also, again, you can see in numbers, each one of them participates in it on a regular basis or on an industrial basis. Also, some Ukrainian mass media also are getting involved, and these are Obozrevatelь, which we mentioned many times, RIA Novosti Ukraine, and information agency Kharkov, which also pretends to be regional Ukrainian information agency, but they're basically part of the Trolls factory in St. Petersburg, and they operate from St. Petersburg. And their task is to show that Russian mass media are referring sort of to Ukrainian media organization. As to narratives, again, a lot has been mentioned here. We basically found 18 major narratives. They work from the March of 2014 till now. They rotate, but based on the Russian or Ukrainian news cycle, they find some other manipulated facts to support that. And here are the main narratives. They coincide with what you mentioned. It's about fascism in Ukraine, about Ukraine as a failed state, and that Russia has nothing to do with the war waged here, that this is in reality a civil war, or that the NATO troops are waging this war. These are Afro-Americans from American army who are disguised as Ukrainians. And I will not mention each one of them separately, but two that have not been mentioned. This is territorial disintegration of Ukraine. Every week you can see one or two stories about some territorial issues and that different parts of Ukraine are getting separated, and the ethnic communities are working actively so that this separation does take place. And if we compare that with how certain groups work locally to create the facts, and they destroyed the monuments, they set to fire some ethnical cultural centers, they persecute local activists and all that. works differently in information space and elsewhere. There were many fake news, pieces of news related to MH17, and one more is Ukraine and the European Union. Russia was against signing the association agreement, and they are trying that the trade doesn't work, the exchange doesn't work, people do not travel. The European Union trying to just use Ukraine, and Ukraine has no future in cooperation with the European Union, and the only thing that Ukraine has to do is to cooperate with Russia. I also would like to ask you about your rating, personal rating of fake news, but I believe the audience will ask this question. Natalia, you know, Ukrainian mass media tell us how sensitive Ukrainian information space is to this propaganda content. 3-4 years ago, the situation was difficult because Ukrainian media broadcasted Russian messages, they disseminated panic, and they were disseminating mistrust to the army. Has this situation changed, and what's the situation now? Good afternoon. I am from Detector Media. I am the head of the NGO Media Detector. We were monitoring Russian narratives. Now we've been monitoring the reflection of Russian propaganda thesis in Ukrainian mass media. I absolutely agree with what my colleagues mentioned, but I will talk in detail about how such Russian fake news is reflected in Russian mass media. Have the main channels of disseminating Russian disinformation changed? Back in 2014, 2015, the central TV channels played more active role than that, but now our monitoring shows that on central TV channels, the situation with direct dissemination of Russian disinformation has improved. There are few and few of them. But there's another thing, the bigger role in disseminating Russian propaganda that is done now via other Russian TV channels, even though the social survey shows that few people are watching them. But when we ask people what TV channels you watch, many people say that they watch different TV channels. But when we ask the question, which TV personalities do you know, who do you trust more, who's more popular, they mention people who, first of all, are broadcasting at the information channels. Like our latest survey on Donbass shows that they mentioned Rabinovich, Dmitry Gordon, and some others. Rabinovich and Dmitry Gordon, these are the people who you will not see on big TV channels. Basically, we need to research more whether this really our measurement is correct. And also we need to mention a big role of the internet. Yevgeny has mentioned Kharkiv agency, news agency, Media Detector was investigating how they work, and we proved that this is in reality the Russian resource which is managed from Russia, but we have sort of Ukrainian publications like Tranayu, Vesti, News One TV channel, and Inter TV channel to a certain extent, which is a large TV channel. And according to our latest monitoring, it disseminates the thesis of direct Russian propaganda. I will quote some, I will read some of the paragraphs of our latest monitoring, which took place in March. And this is on when Ukraine won the Stockholm court, when it was about the case of Naftogaz Ukraine versus Gazprom, and they were writing a lot of negative things about our victory, and unfortunately some Russian publications supported that, like the most similar to coordinated attack of Russian mass media was the thesis that Ukraine will not have enough Russian gas during the crisis, and that was the repetition of what Kommersant wrote. In Ukraine, the statement also was published on the 2nd of March, and the messages which we saw, because of the growth of consumption in Europe, there's no gas for Ukraine. There's the situation when we need more gas, and there's not enough gas in the market of Europe where we bought it before, and that was disinformation. The next wave of information gas attack was taking place on the 5th of March, where they found then some publications, Vesti and TV channels, Inter and News One, they started disseminating the thesis about the lack of energy security and loss of transit. In one case, Ukrainian mass media were ahead of their Russian colleagues. On the 5th of March, Inter and Vesti mentioned that the price for natural gas for consumers will grow up. Russia published it on the 6th of March. They published that information that now Naftogaz buys gas which is 4 times more expensive. This was the wrong information. On the 5th of March, Naftogaz explained everything about the price, but Inter and Vesti, they did not mention this information for their viewers and TV viewers. So basically, Ukrainian TV channels are involved into disseminating the propaganda. Do you know what is the percentage? Is that because some political groups are involved? I just wanted to continue. We understand that some Ukrainian mass media directly are not Ukrainian, in fact, and they are financed from Russia. Unfortunately, in this case, like with RIA Novosti, as security service doesn't work very efficiently to prove that the money comes from Russia and to prove how so-called Ukrainian mass media are financed. On the other hand, the big problem is that now the dissemination of Russia propaganda goes along with the criticism of Ukrainian authorities. And that is what our Ukrainian mass media are doing. And it's difficult to differentiate between the criticism which should be taking place, because we, democratic mass media, should criticize the government and Verkhovna Rada, all the institutions, all the authorities. But very often that is done by Russia in their own interests. And this balance, how to have the appropriate criticism which should be present in the democratic country, and the criticism which is based on disinformation or exaggeration, or there's no constructive balance. A big problem is that there is a big mistrust to Ukrainian mass media in the East, but on the other hand, people do not know a lot about actions of authorities, about the reforms. There's not enough constructive journalism in Ukraine, where the criticism would be combined with telling how to overcome problems, how could communities control the authorities, and how could the citizens address the problems involving the public and NGOs. And this will become a good foundation for turning the criticism into, because otherwise the criticism will be doing what Russia wants to do.
Sometimes Russia has nothing to do. Everything is done only to strengthen those negative messages which are coming from Ukraine. Now, let's give the floor to Mr. Raul Rebane. What problems about which you heard today, they are the same for Estonia, for example? What problems with Russian propaganda you face in Estonia?
Look at my gray hair. It means that if I switch in Russian, I'm veteran информационной войны. And in Estonia, we have some experience.
I'm a veteran of Estonian anti-Russian propaganda.
You have heard about it. It's so-called bronze soldier events. And in these days, we learned a lot about Russian propaganda. We learned what is fake news. We learned that if there is a Russian TV cameras, you have to follow camera, not events. Normally, cameras follow events. In our case, events were following camera, which is totally different, which means that if camera go there, something is going on. But what was our problem? We never could explain it to the Western countries, to Europe, what is really going on, because they didn't really believe. On a 3rd, 2nd of May...
Прошу, чекайте секунду. А чують вас? А чому у нас там? Вже з'явився? З'явився? Так, чути є. Ну, ми можемо, справді, Рауль може і російською. Якщо є проблеми з українською, підкажіть. Немає вже проблем? Все добре.
And 2nd of 3rd of May 2007, there was a seminar of NATO, huge seminar really, about psychological operations and information warfare. There was 25 reports and one about Russia, which means that West didn't believe what's going on in Russia. They really didn't know. What's the problem? They don't know language. There are no people who really follow Russian TV, and they think it's media. A little bit different media, but it's media. As we learn today, and we learn more, it's not media. So I have to say that the research or study, what was done by Ukrainian Youth Center, and together with the Estonian Eastern Partnership Center, and what was presented in November in Brussels, later in Tallinn, and in several places more, is probably one of the most important sociological researches last half a year, maybe last year. I have personal experience to present it in different places and to hear the comments of Western and foreign countries, of a lot of countries. Maybe it's better to see the video first, and then I will give some presentation what I have heard. Now the video about this the image of Western countries in Russian media.
Единственное, чем могут выделиться эти люди из прибалтийских республик, это нападками на Советский Союз и на Российскую Федерацию. Под этой ширмой постоянные угрозы, что их собираются захватить и оккупировать, они пользуются поддержкой, простите, Запада.
Появились свидетельства, что в Германии мигранты начали насиловать несовершеннолетних детей, а граждане страны говорят о безнаказанности и вседозволенности для преступников.
Потому что никаких европейских ценностей нету.
Мы же видим, что, в общем-то, Евросоюз сам по себе разваливается.
Итоги года подводит и Европа, которая, если еще и не потрескивает, то по швам уже трещит. Брексит, правый поворот, раскалывающие всех мигранты. Европейский лидер Германии в политическом параличе.
По официальным данным, в 2011 году Югендамт Германии изъял из традиционных семей и передал однополым 38 500 детей.
Например, в Соединенных Штатах Америки, в Канаде, в Англии, в странах Евросоюза практика сжигания сердец геев просто-напросто повседневна.
129 малышей за неполные 3 года. Норвегия и Финляндия продолжают воровать наших детей.
Подобные случаи происходят в благополучных скандинавских странах с пугающей регулярностью. Только за минувший месяц об изъятии детей заявили 3 российские семьи.
По финским законам детей могут забрать без предупреждения и разбирательств. Сначала в детский дом, позже к приемным родителям. Суд и следствие для этого не нужны.
О праве на частную жизнь не вспоминают, когда приходят забирать ребенка из семьи. А то, что называют изъятием ребенка, выглядит порой как спецоперация.
Вчера пришло кому-то, писали 14 человек отбирать детей. Можете себе представить?
В центре Стокгольма женщина-полицейский задержала мужчину из-за того, что мышцы молодого человека, по ее мнению, были неестественно большими.
Но интерес часто вызывают совсем другие символы. То женская блузка от известного бренда с, на первый взгляд, незаметными нацистскими зигами.
Новая бедность во Франции – явление, к которому трудно привыкнуть.
Чтобы чем-то кормить детей, флорист повыкручивала в квартире лампочки.
В Германии быть неонацистом становится модно. В целом создается впечатление, что еще немного, и Европа начнет вести себя так, как будто на дворе 1938 год, ночь разбитых витрин в гитлеровской Германии.
Впрочем, здесь и ежегодные шествия ветеранов латышского легиона СС никого не удивляют. Их дети и внуки, похоже, учили какую-то другую историю, в которой убийцы стали героями.
В попытках вытереть ноги о собственную историю Польша соревнуется с Прибалтикой. Послы Эстонии, Латвии и Литвы возмутились недавней публикацией во французской «Le Monde», где их страны были названы бывшими советскими республиками и потребовали больше себя так никогда не называть.
В Латвии фашистов уже на законодательном уровне возводят в ранг героев.
По словам президента Эстонии Керсти Kaljulaid, резервная армия должна быть способна к мобилизации в считанные часы и дни.
Самолет МиГ-29 будет в Эстонии через 5 минут. Псковская бригада ВДВ через час. Не смешите нас своей мобилизацией.
Сейчас Польша называет себя главной жертвой Второй мировой. Но не Аналия была ее хищным инициатором, но просчиталась. Уже в наше время поляки крушат памятники советским воинам. Нападают на российских футбольных болельщиков. Не пускают в Европу через свою территорию российских байкеров и клянчат деньги. А ведь если прикинуть, еще должны оставаться.
Исторический путь Европы завершился пиком Европы объединения под нацистским флагом, когда они получили по харе русским сапогом.
Дания оказалась в центре международного зоосекс-туризма.
В причинах могущества педофильского лобби разбирался наш корреспондент Иван Благой.
В 1984 году Ассоциация геев, транссексуалов и педофилов официально вошла в один из комитетов фракции «Зеленых» в Бундестаге, то есть могла оказывать прямое влияние на политический курс партии и работу парламента.
В Европе потихоньку, почти незаметно, но все же началось обсуждение разработки закона о легализации инцеста. А в Норвегии и в Исландии инцест фактически уже легализован. Теперь же некоторые политики Европы, в первую очередь Скандинавии, открыто называют инцест гендерной нормой. Причем по аналогу гомофобии предлагают ввести такое понятие, как инцестофобия, за которую будут наказывать. Главные борцы за идею – неолибералы и активисты гей-движения. Многие депутаты местных парламентов, продвигающие свою идею всеми возможными способами.
Почему зоофилы со всей Европы хлынули в Данию, и долго ли это будет продолжаться?
Россия на коленях стоять не будут. Вот эти к нам еще приползут на коленях и будут просить наших новых технологий, наших космических программ, и мы еще будем кормить Европу и Америку.
Это похороны Евросоюза, это реквием по Евросоюзу.
Давайте
уж точно это реквием по традиционным ценностям в Европе.
Страны Прибалтики уже заявили, что они-то останутся в Евросоюзе.
Ну, да,
то есть от Калининграда до
Кому не нужны, это мусор.
Как же нас достали эти НАТО и ЕС, пусть себе засунут свой технический прогресс.
It's about this story and this research. Actually, reactions were shocking. And probably the first time it was on a scientific basis, proved 31,000 stories on 6 narratives, and all this methodology was so strong that scientists started to believe it. And the reaction was now, especially from Nordic countries, because 85% is average negativity of the stories, 85%. Only 4 countries, they are a little bit lower. There's Serbia, Montenegro, Switzerland, and Belarus. And for example, Finlandia, traditionally very positive attitude and good relations, they get 87%. Sweden, 88%. This was shocking. Now the Danish people hear that they have some kind of zoophilia problem, and there's, the kids are taken away. So there is no journalism anymore. And this is poor narrative-based story making, and the importance of this research must be in a lot of countries. I have said that the interest, for example, in the last 2 weeks, we have been contacted by 5 ambassadors of different European countries to get some information about this research. So you have done a great job. Thank you.
Дякую дуже. Давайте перейдемо до питань та відповідей. У нас не так багато часу залишилось.
Thank you very much. Let us now shift to our Q&A session and discuss what you are interested to know. Who will be the first? Please do not forget to mention your name and Katerina Майборода, Zaporizhia 061 site. Question to everybody. Do you think that it is efficient trying to overcome them through internet and trying to put a barrier to them in internet? When we analyze, while we analyzed only TV channels, we know that our colleagues work with internet and other media sources. For us, it became clear that counteraction in internet would require much more resources to put an end to this disinformation. And nevertheless, we observe that the same narratives are brought to the audience attention. And in order to eliminate them, to put to them some barriers, we should put an end everywhere. But we should explain that these narratives are disseminated not by media. That is, the fakes which started in TV, they go into internet, and the audience does not know that these are fake news. In our opinion, in opinion of our organization, we understand that despite of all our good research, despite of all our disclosures made about that fake news, we won't overcome that huge resources invested by Russia into fake. While fake is disseminated very quickly, then it takes a lot of time and effort and resources to eliminate that bad impact. So our strategy is as follows. We should involve TV resources, not just internet, to disclose these fakes. Then we should produce the programs which will train people in media understanding, and we should not expose fake news and explain that they are not true. But we should counteract via production of our own content, which will raise trust among Ukrainian population, Estonian population, and this will be like antidote to that propaganda. We understand that in our mass media situation is bad, and we should explain to our people what are our goals, how reforms are being introduced, what we try to achieve, instead of pointing out to fake news all the time. Danina Figal, Вечерний Nikolaev newspaper. In the United Kingdom, there is a special body which monitors compliance of mass media with the established government regulations or standards. Why in Ukraine we do not have such standards, and why we do not have even legislative initiatives about such standards, and of course nobody monitors compliance to such standards. Why we do not bring in some foreign experts to do this? I will try to answer your question. By the way, we have similar body to the UK agency, but which is called the National Media Council, which for years rejected to carry out this monitoring job. Today it tries to begin this work, but on the other hand, it lacks resources. And the second, which is important, it is a body which is comprising different political forces or influence. For example, one of TV channels organized a cynical marathon on May 9th about victory in the Great Patriotic War, how they call it, and unfortunately unfortunately, in that very state council, we did not gather enough votes to impose some sanctions on that TV channel. Here we need joint effort from people and from the state to introduce reforms. We have to preserve balance between the freedom of speech and I would like to give a mic either to Raul or to Yevgeny. It is important for us to be supported by Western partners in our attempt to counteract Russian propaganda, which is the case.
I thank you for the discussion. I believe that we will finish on that because this part is over and we are moving to the next very important part.